"I want you to have my son," the giant cowboy said to the black widowed teacher. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the Redstone Gulch Town Hall as Millicent Davenport stood before 12 hostile faces. The wooden floor creaked beneath her worn boots. Sweat beaded on her forehead despite the cool October air. Sheriff Thomas Whitaker leaned back in his chair at the head of the council table. His badge caught the light streaming through dusty windows. The other council members avoided her gaze. Mrs. Henderson from the general store spoke first. Her voice carried the weight of community judgment. The children were learning too much too fast. It made the other parents uncomfortable. Some families threatened to leave town if changes weren't made. Millie kept her hands clasped behind her back. She had taught their children to read Shakespeare and solve complex arithmetic. Test scores had improved dramatically over the past year. 3 students had already received letters of interest from territorial colleges. The council murmured among themselves. Sheriff Whitaker stood slowly. His decision was final. A more suitable teacher would arrive from back east within the month. Proper arrangements would be made. The vote was unanimous. Millie walked home through streets that suddenly felt foreign. The schoolhouse where she had lived since her husband's death 2 years ago would soon belong to someone else. The general store had already refused her credit that morning. Former allies crossed to the other side of the dusty Main Street. Thunder rolled across the distant mountains as a massive figure on horseback entered town. The stranger's shadow fell across the entire width of the street. A small boy rode beside him on a paint mare. Conversation stopped. Windows' shutters creaked as curious eyes peered out. The giant dismounted at the livery stable. His movements were careful and deliberate. The boy stayed close to his father's side. Both were trail-worn and weary. At the market the next morning, Millie watched the child examine apples with scientific precision. He counted them by 2s and 3s. His mathematical approach reminded her of her brightest students. The giant approached her slowly. His voice was softer than his appearance suggested. He had observed her kindness with the local children. He needed someone of character for an important task. The request stunned her into silence. He wanted her to care for his son. Dangerous business called him away. The boy needed someone who understood the value of education and integrity. Millie studied the child's intelligent eyes and his father's weathered face. Sheriff Whitaker watched them from across the street. His hand rested on his gun belt. Something in his expression suggested this stranger represented more than just an inconvenience. The stakes were rising in Redstone Gulch. Millie could feel the weight of a decision that would change everything. Elijah Harkness possessed the unsettling ability to see through adult pretenses. He sat at Millie's small kitchen table in the abandoned church where she now sheltered. His fingers traced patterns on the worn wood as he spoke of his mother. She had been kind like Millie. She taught him letters and numbers before the bad men came. His father hunted those men now. They had taken everything good from their family. Millie's breath caught. The boy's innocent words carried devastating implications. Wyatt wasn't just passing through Redstone Gulch. He was hunting killers. The realization sent ice through her veins. Her own husband's death 2 years ago hadn't been a mining accident. Thomas Davenport had worked the telegraph lines and asked too many questions about suspicious land transfers. The cave collapse that killed him had been too convenient. She pulled out her husband's hidden papers that evening. Thomas had been more than a telegraph operator. During the war, he had served as a Union spy. She had helped him decode Confederate messages in their cramped quarters. Her mind could see patterns others missed. Numbers and letters formed pictures that revealed enemy troop movements. Those same skills now showed her a different picture. Homesteader deaths across the territory followed a clear pattern. Families would stake claims on valuable land. Within months, mysterious accidents would befall them. The land would then be purchased by shell companies connected to local officials. Sheriff Whitaker's name appeared on too many documents. The next morning brought disturbing news. Whitaker had identified their mysterious visitor through wanted posters. Wyatt Harkness was a former United States Marshal turned bounty hunter. The sheriff called an emergency town meeting. Millie watched from the church window as Whitaker addressed the gathered crowd. The giant represented danger to their peaceful community. His association with the former teacher proved his poor judgment. Children were at risk. The crowd murmured agreement. Fear spread faster than truth in small towns. But Wyatt had already shared his real purpose with Millie. He worked with federal authorities to expose a network of claim jumpers and murderers. His wife had discovered their operation in another territory. Her death had been swift and brutal. The federal government suspected the corruption reached deep into Arizona's territorial administration. They needed someone inside Redstone Gulch who could gather evidence. Someone the criminals wouldn't suspect. Millie realized she had been that someone all along. Her husband's murder had made her invisible to the perpetrators. A grieving widow posed no threat. Her dismissal from teaching had actually freed her to investigate more thoroughly. She had been intercepting telegraph messages for weeks. Thomas had taught her to tap the lines without detection. Sheriff Whitaker's communications revealed meetings with land speculators from Phoenix and Tucson. Money changed hands after each suspicious death. The pattern extended beyond Redstone Gulch. Similar operations existed throughout the territory. Federal marshals had been investigating for months but needed local evidence to make arrests. Wyatt's arrival was perfectly timed. The federal net was closing. He represented the final phase of a complex operation. Millie's dismissal from teaching suddenly made perfect sense. Someone had been watching the situation carefully. Someone who understood she was the only person in town with both the intelligence and integrity to help federal authorities. The replacement teacher from back east wasn't really a teacher at all. Sheriff Whitaker began organizing his response to the federal threat. He assigned deputies to watch both Wyatt and Millie. The abandoned church where she sheltered with Elijah became a focal point of surveillance. Town sentiment turned increasingly hostile. Some citizens had profited from the land grab scheme. Others simply feared change. The comfortable prejudices that kept Millie marginalized also protected the corrupt system. But cracks appeared in Whitaker's control. Several homesteader families had lost fathers under suspicious circumstances. Their widows began asking uncomfortable questions. The preacher delivered sermons about justice and truth. Even some council members expressed private doubts. Wyatt met secretly with Millie after dark. He confirmed her suspicions about federal involvement. Her intelligence gathering had provided crucial missing pieces. The telegraph intercepts proved coordination between multiple territories. Together, they organized evidence into an irrefutable case. Millie's strategic mind saw connections Wyatt's law enforcement training had missed. Her husband's wartime spy techniques revealed the full scope of the conspiracy. The federal government was ready to act. Warrants had been prepared. Marshals waited just outside territorial boundaries. Only final confirmation was needed. But Sheriff Whitaker sensed the approaching danger. His paranoia reached desperate levels. Spies reported conversations between Millie and Wyatt. The sheriff decided to eliminate the threat before federal authorities could intervene. He began planning their arrest. Charges of conspiracy and child endangerment would justify immediate action. A convenient accident during transport would solve the problem permanently. The trap was set for the following evening. Whitaker's men would surround the church during the dinner hour. Resistance would be met with overwhelming force. No witnesses would survive to contradict his version of events. Millie felt the walls closing around them. Her strategic training told her the endgame was approaching. All the evidence in the world meant nothing if they couldn't survive to present it. She made final preparations through the afternoon. Messages were sent through channels Thomas had established years ago. Federal authorities received their coordinates and timeline. Everything depended on perfect timing and absolute courage. The battle for Redstone Gulch's soul was about to begin. The abandoned church offered little protection against determined men. Millie counted 8 figures surrounding the building as sunset painted the sky crimson. Sheriff Whitaker's voice carried clearly through the thin walls. She had 1 hour to surrender the boy and reveal Wyatt's location. Resistance would be met with fire. Elijah pressed close to her side. His young eyes held fear but also trust. He believed she would protect him. That faith gave her strength. Millie's mind raced through possibilities. Every strategic principle Thomas had taught her during those long wartime nights came flooding back. Superior numbers meant nothing without superior position. Information was the ultimate weapon. She had anticipated this moment for days. Her husband's spy training had prepared her to read enemy intentions. Whitaker's desperation made him predictable. The sheriff expected panic. He counted on her maternal instincts overriding tactical thinking. His mistake was assuming she thought like other women in Redstone Gulch. Millie moved to the church's small window. She could see townspeople gathering in the street. Some faces showed horror at Whitaker's extreme tactics. Others revealed the ugly satisfaction of long-held prejudices finally being validated. Mrs. Henderson from the general store argued with her husband. The preacher stood on his porch with arms crossed. Several homesteader widows pushed through the crowd toward the church. The town was fracturing along invisible lines. Years of buried resentment and suppressed guilt were rising to the surface. Whitaker shouted again. 30 minutes remained. Millie pulled out the documents she had organized with Wyatt. Telegraph intercepts, land transfer records, and witness statements formed an irrefutable pattern. But evidence meant nothing if they died before presenting it. She moved to the church's rear wall and began tapping a coded message on the wooden beam. Thomas had installed the system years ago when he suspected surveillance. The signal would carry through underground telegraph lines to federal authorities waiting outside town. Her fingers moved with practiced precision. Short taps and long taps spelled out their situation. Help needed immediately, evidence ready for transmission. The response came within minutes. Federal marshals were moving into position. Hold for 20 minutes. 20 minutes felt like forever with armed men outside. Millie heard horses approaching from the east. Wyatt's distinctive silhouette appeared on the ridge overlooking town. But he wasn't alone. 3 other riders accompanied him. Their badges caught the last rays of sunlight. Federal marshals had arrived ahead of schedule. Whitaker noticed the new arrivals immediately. His confident voice turned sharp with panic. The situation was spinning beyond his control. One of the marshals dismounted and approached the sheriff. The conversation was too distant to hear, but their body language told the story. Official warrants were being served. Federal authority superseded local jurisdiction. Whitaker's men looked uncertain. They had signed up to intimidate a widow and child. Confronting federal marshals was different business entirely. The church door opened slowly. Marshal James Patterson stepped inside with hands visible and empty. His weathered face carried the authority of decades in law enforcement. He had been coordinating with both Wyatt and Millie for weeks. The mysterious replacement teacher from back east had been his idea. Agent Sarah Collins had provided the perfect cover for federal investigation. Patterson confirmed what Millie had suspected. She had been identified as the only trustworthy person in Redstone Gulch months ago. Her intelligence and integrity made her invaluable to their operation. The federal government had been tracking the land grab conspiracy across multiple territories. Arizona was the final piece. Corruption reached into the territorial capital and possibly Washington itself. Millie's evidence provided the smoking gun they needed. Her telegraph intercepts proved coordination between local officials and eastern land speculators. The systematic murder of homesteaders was just the beginning. Patterson spread the documents across the church's small table. Names and dates formed a web of corruption that reached far beyond Redstone Gulch. Senators and railroad barons were implicated. The marshal explained the federal strategy. Mass arrests would happen simultaneously across 3 territories. Local conspirators couldn't warn their associates or destroy evidence. Wyatt entered the church as Patterson finished his explanation. The giant's face showed grim satisfaction. Justice for his murdered wife was finally within reach. But he had learned something more important during his quest for vengeance. Millie's strategic mind had been the key to everything. Her ability to see patterns and connections had made the federal case possible. She wasn't just helping them, she was leading them. Outside, Sheriff Whitaker made his final desperate play. He accused the federal marshals of exceeding their authority. Territorial law protected local officials from federal interference. Patterson stepped onto the church porch with warrants in hand. His voice carried across the gathered crowd. Federal crimes superseded territorial jurisdiction. Murder and conspiracy crossed state lines. The evidence was overwhelming. Telegraph records proved coordination between territories. Bank records showed payments after each suspicious death. Witness statements connected local officials to the conspiracy. Whitaker reached for his weapon. 3 Marshall guns appeared instantly. The sheriff's hand froze on his holster. The moment stretched like a taut wire. One wrong move would shatter the careful legal framework Patterson had constructed. Millie appeared in the doorway beside the marshal. Her calm presence seemed to drain tension from the air. She held a thick folder of documents. Her voice carried clearly across the silent crowd. The evidence spoke for itself. Justice would be served through law, not violence. Whitaker's hand fell away from his gun. The fight went out of him like air from a punctured balloon. The trap had been turned inside out. The hunters had become the hunted. The handcuffs clicked shut around Sheriff Whitaker's wrists with metallic finality. Marshal Patterson's voice carried the weight of federal authority as he read the charges. Conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, theft of federal lands, abuse of office. 3 town council members joined Whitaker in shackles. Their faces showed the pale shock of men who believed themselves untouchable. The general store owner wept openly. The banker stared at his feet in shame. Millie watched from the church steps as her tormentors became prisoners. Elijah stood beside her with wide eyes. Justice looked different than either of them had imagined. No gunfight, no dramatic speeches, just the quiet efficiency of law enforcement doing its job. The crowd remained frozen in stunned silence. Everything they thought they knew about their town had been revealed as lies. The respected sheriff was a murderer. The trusted council members were thieves. Marshal Patterson approached Millie with newfound respect in his weathered features. Her strategic planning had made this entire operation possible. Federal authorities had been investigating for months without success, until her intelligence broke the case wide open. She had been coordinating with them longer than anyone suspected. The letters she sent after her husband's death had reached the right people in Washington. Her background as a wartime code breaker had been noted in federal files. Agent Sarah Collins stepped forward from the crowd. The supposed replacement teacher revealed her true identity at last. She had been gathering evidence for weeks while maintaining perfect cover. Her reports confirmed everything Millie had suspected about the conspiracy. Wyatt joined the group on the church steps. His massive frame no longer seemed threatening to the townspeople. They understood now that he represented justice, not violence. His patient investigation had provided the legal foundation for federal intervention. Together, the 3 civilians had accomplished what law enforcement couldn't achieve alone. Their combined skills created an unstoppable force for truth. But Millie had orchestrated more than anyone realized. Her master plan extended far beyond catching corrupt officials. She had been rebuilding the entire foundation of Redstone Gulch society. The homesteader widows pushed through the crowd toward the church. These women had lost husbands to the conspiracy. Their children had been left fatherless by the greed of local officials. They surrounded Millie with tears and gratitude. Mrs. Sarah Jenkins spoke for the group. Her husband had died in a suspicious cave collapse 6 months ago. The family lost their land claim within days. She knew something was wrong but had no power to investigate. 3 other widows shared similar stories. Accidents that seemed too convenient. land transfers that happened too quickly, official explanations that made no sense. Millie had quietly documented each case. She connected the dots between seemingly unrelated incidents. Her strategic mind saw the pattern that grief had hidden from the victims themselves. The federal investigation would return stolen lands to rightful owners. Compensation would be paid to affected families. The conspiracy had stolen more than property. It had robbed children of their futures and widows of their security. Agent Collins addressed the gathered crowd. The corruption extended far beyond Redstone Gulch. Similar operations existed throughout Arizona Territory and beyond. Today's arrests were part of a coordinated federal response. Railroad interests and Eastern speculators had been systematically stealing valuable lands. Local officials provided the muscle. Territorial politicians provided protection. The conspiracy reached into the highest levels of government, but the criminal network was collapsing. Evidence gathered in Redstone Gulch had exposed the entire operation. Mass arrests were happening simultaneously across 3 territories. The townspeople began to understand the magnitude of what had occurred. Their small community had been ground zero for a massive federal investigation. The quiet widow they had dismissed as insignificant had been the key to everything. Some faces showed shame at their past treatment of Millie. Others revealed anger at being deceived by trusted leaders. A few displayed the stubborn resentment of people whose prejudices had been proven wrong. Millie stepped forward to address her community. Her voice carried new authority born of vindication and purpose. The town faced a choice about its future. They could cling to old hatreds or build something better. Elijah moved closer to her side. The boy had found more than safety in her care. He had discovered what family meant. His father's quest for justice had given him something precious and unexpected. Wyatt's expression softened as he watched them together. His hunt for his wife's killers was ending, but something new was beginning. The partnership forged in crisis had become something deeper and more meaningful. Marshal Patterson announced the immediate appointments. Federal oversight would continue until new elections could be held. Agent Collins would remain as temporary administrator. Honest citizens would be recruited for leadership positions. The position of sheriff required someone with law enforcement experience and community trust. Patterson's gaze settled on Wyatt. The job offered a chance to use his skills constructively rather than destructively. Millie received an unexpected offer. The Territorial Education Department needed someone to oversee reforms across multiple communities. Her intelligence and leadership abilities were exactly what Arizona needed. The old power structure was crumbling. New opportunities were emerging for people previously excluded from influence. Merit would replace prejudice as the standard for advancement. Children who had been Millie's students cheered from the crowd. They understood better than their parents what they had lost when she was dismissed. Her return to education meant hope for their futures. The sun was setting behind the mountains as the federal wagons prepared to depart with their prisoners. Redstone Gulch looked the same as it had that morning, but everything had changed beneath the surface. Truth had triumphed over deception. Justice had defeated corruption. An unlikely alliance had proven stronger than entrenched power. 3 months later, Millie stood before a packed town hall that buzzed with respectful attention. The same room where she had been humiliated now hosted her first address as an elected council member. Faces that once showed hostility displayed curiosity and growing acceptance. Her transformation from outcast to leader had been gradual but undeniable. The Territorial Education Department had officially appointed her as regional supervisor. Her reforms were already spreading to neighboring communities. Test scores and enrollment numbers told a story of dramatic improvement. Wyatt occupied the sheriff's chair with quiet authority. His badge gleamed against his dark vest. The town that once feared his presence now sought his protection. Crime had dropped to virtually nothing under his leadership. Even former skeptics admitted he was the best lawman Redstone Gulch had ever known. Elijah thrived in his new stability. The boy had grown taller and more confident in the months since the arrests. His academic abilities astounded everyone except Millie, who had recognized his potential from their first meeting. He helped younger children with their lessons and translated between English and Spanish for new immigrant families. The three had become a genuine family through shared trials and mutual respect. Their evening meals around Millie's small table were filled with discussions of books, current events, and plans for the future. Love had grown naturally from common values and complementary strengths. Mrs. Henderson approached Millie after the council meeting. The general store owner's wife carried herself differently now. Her former arrogance had been replaced by something approaching humility. She wanted to apologize for her past behavior and ask for forgiveness. Similar conversations had been happening throughout the community. People who had supported Millie's dismissal struggled with guilt and shame. Some sought redemption through changed behavior. Others remained defensive about their previous positions. The preacher had delivered a series of sermons about second chances and community healing. His messages emphasized the biblical principle that all people deserved dignity and respect. Sunday attendance had increased as residents grappled with moral questions they had long avoided. Agent Collins had remained in town to oversee the transition. Her administrative skills proved invaluable in establishing new systems of governance. Under her guidance, Redstone Gulch had become a model community for territorial reform efforts. The land redistribution process was nearly complete. Stolen properties had been returned to rightful owners or their surviving families. The homesteader widows were rebuilding their lives with federal compensation and community support. Their children attended Millie's integrated school alongside the offspring of former oppressors. Dr. Elizabeth Warren arrived from Denver to establish the territory's first racially integrated medical practice. Her credentials were impeccable, but her skin color initially caused controversy. Millie's endorsement and Wyatt's protection allowed her to prove her worth through competent care. The doctor's success reinforced the principle that merit mattered more than appearance. Other communities began recruiting talented professionals regardless of their backgrounds. Arizona Territory was experiencing a quiet revolution in social attitudes. Millie's educational reforms extended far beyond traditional classroom subjects. Students learned critical thinking skills that helped them question prejudice and analyze information independently. They studied local history honestly, including uncomfortable truths about recent corruption. The integrated curriculum included perspectives from multiple cultures. Mexican-American children shared their family traditions. African-American students contributed their community experiences. White children learned that their way of seeing the world wasn't the only valid perspective. Parent resistance had initially been strong but gradually weakened as results became undeniable. Children who learned alongside diverse classmates displayed greater creativity, empathy, and problem-solving abilities. Academic achievement rose across all demographic groups. Wyatt's law enforcement philosophy emphasized community partnership over authoritarian control. He walked the streets daily, talking with citizens about their concerns. His presence reassured honest people while deterring criminal behavior through relationships rather than fear. The sheriff's office reflected his inclusive approach. His deputies included men from various backgrounds who shared his commitment to equal justice. Training emphasized de-escalation and community service. Use of force became genuinely rare rather than routine. Federal authorities had taken notice of Redstone Gulch's transformation. Territorial officials visited regularly to study their methods. Other communities requested assistance with similar reforms. Success bred more success as positive changes spread throughout the region. Millie received letters from educators across the country seeking advice about integration strategies. Her responses emphasized patience, persistence, and unwavering commitment to excellence. Change required time but produced lasting benefits when implemented thoughtfully. The railroad announced plans for a new depot in Redstone Gulch. Economic development followed social progress as the community gained a reputation for stability and opportunity. Businesses that had struggled under corruption began to prosper. Employment increased as new enterprises arrived. Young people who might have left for opportunities elsewhere chose to remain and contribute to their hometown's renaissance. Elijah spoke often about becoming a teacher like Millie or a lawman like Wyatt. His future seemed bright with possibilities. Evening walks through town revealed the depth of transformation. Children played together across racial lines. Families gathered on porches without the suspicious watchfulness that had once characterized social interaction. Conversations flowed more freely as fear gave way to hope. The abandoned church where Millie had sheltered during the crisis now housed a community library. Donated books filled shelves that welcomed readers of all ages and backgrounds. The building that had once symbolized desperation had become a beacon of learning and growth. Millie often paused there during her evening strolls. The memory of that desperate night felt distant now, like something that had happened to someone else. She had discovered strength she never knew she possessed and found family in the most unexpected places. 1 year after the arrests, Millie stood before the same council table where she had once faced humiliation. The wooden nameplate in front of her read, Councilwoman Davenport, Education Committee Chair. The 12 faces looking back at her now showed respect, attention, and genuine interest in her words. The transformation was complete but felt entirely natural. She addressed budget proposals for the new school expansion with the same calm authority she had once used to defend her right to teach. The difference was that now everyone listened. Wyatt sat in the front row with his sheriff's hat resting on his knee. His presence at council meetings had become routine rather than threatening. Citizens approached him regularly with concerns, knowing they would receive fair consideration regardless of their background or social standing. Elijah occupied a chair beside his adoptive father, taking careful notes for his school newspaper. The boy had grown into a confident young man who moved easily between adult and childhood worlds. His article about the council meeting would appear in papers across the territory, part of a student exchange program Millie had established. The agenda included reports from visiting officials who had come to study Redstone Gulch's remarkable transformation. Representatives from 3 other territories wanted to implement similar reforms in their communities. Success had made them a model for progressive change throughout the American West. Dr. Warren presented statistics on community health improvements. Integrated medical care had reduced disease outbreaks and improved outcomes for all demographic groups. Her practice now served 6 surrounding towns, proving that competent healthcare transcended artificial social barriers. Agent Collins, now serving as territorial liaison, reported on economic growth. New businesses had increased local employment by 40%. Property values had risen steadily as the community's reputation for stability and opportunity spread. Railroad development brought additional investment and connections to eastern markets. The school expansion project represented the crown jewel of reconstruction efforts. The new building would house 200 students from kindergarten through high school. Advanced courses would prepare graduates for territorial universities and eastern colleges. The facility would be the finest educational institution in Arizona Territory. A bronze plaque beside the main entrance would read, Millie Davenport School, where every mind matters. The inscription captured the philosophy that had guided all their reforms. Intelligence and character mattered more than appearance or family background. Millie's curriculum innovations had attracted attention from educational reformers nationwide. Her integration strategies were being implemented in schools from California to Texas. Teacher training programs invited her to speak about methods and philosophy. Several universities had offered her advanced degrees in recognition of her contributions. But her greatest satisfaction came from watching former students succeed in ways previously unimaginable. Maria Gonzalez had received a scholarship to study law in San Francisco. James Thompson was apprenticing with the Territorial Surveyor's Office. Sarah Washington planned to become a doctor like Dr. Warren. These children represented the future Millie had envisioned during her darkest moments. Their achievements validated every sacrifice and struggle. They would carry forward the principles of equality and excellence into their own adult lives. The evening meeting concluded with announcements about the upcoming Territorial Education Conference. Redstone Gulch would host educators from across the Southwest. Workshops would cover integration strategies, advanced curricula, and community partnership building. Millie walked home through streets that now felt entirely welcoming. Families waved from their porches. Children called out greetings as they played in yards that no longer seemed divided by invisible barriers. The community had truly become unified around shared values and common goals. Wyatt and Elijah flanked her as they approached their house. The modest dwelling had been expanded to accommodate their growing family. A white picket fence enclosed a garden where vegetables grew alongside flowers. It looked like the home of successful, respected citizens, which they had become. Their evening routine included discussions of the day's events over Millie's cooking. Elijah shared news from school and asked questions about complex topics. Wyatt reported on law enforcement matters and community concerns. Millie described her latest correspondence with educators and officials from other regions. These conversations represented the intellectual partnership that had developed naturally among the three. Each contributed unique perspectives and expertise. Their differences in background and experience had become sources of strength rather than division. Federal authorities continued to cite Redstone Gulch as proof that social progress was possible, even in the most challenging circumstances. Their transformation had inspired similar efforts throughout the expanding nation. The principles they had established were spreading far beyond their small Arizona community. Sunday morning brought the whole town together for the dedication ceremony of the completed school building. Children from every family gathered on the front steps for photographs that would be published in territorial newspapers. Their faces reflected hope, confidence, and unlimited potential. Millie cut the ribbon while Wyatt and Elijah stood proudly beside her. The crowd applauded with genuine enthusiasm. These were the same people who had once demanded her dismissal. Now they celebrated her achievements and trusted her with their children's futures. The school bell rang for the first time, calling students to classes that would prepare them for a world where merit mattered more than prejudice. Inside those classrooms, every mind would indeed matter. The future had finally arrived in Redstone Gulch, and it looked exactly like justice. And that is all to the story for now. Please let me know where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will create a story there. Consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. And if you enjoy our content, click this video on your screen. I promise you it's worth watching. See you tomorrow.